everyone. It's 4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to our CLS webinar on grading. I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Douglas Reeves, and I will also be introducing our panel. Many of you know him by his bow tie, but things that you might not know about him is that he is the author of more than 40 books and I think a bazillion articles. He is passionate about grading and fairness for students. And we have the distinct pleasure of having him lead us today. So Dr. Reeves.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm so delighted that you could join us today. And I just want to say a couple of things before I turn it over to Anne. Number one, we have to stop thinking about grading as merely an evaluation. Grading is about feedback. How do we help kids get better? And this is being broadcast in March of 2024. What I heard a principal tell me this morning was March Madness, because this is a crazy time of year. I've heard people say that in March, man, if a student has dug a hole so deep they can't get out of it, they're going to fail no matter what. And I'm going to respectfully challenge that. It's our responsibility to provide resilience and perseverance to help kids get better and better and better, no matter what. So even though it's March, even though it's springtime, it's not too late to help our kids get better. So if you have a grading program, for example, especially an electronic grading program that dooms students to failure, I'm going to ask you to challenge that. And I want to say that between now and the end of this year, they can get better. Our group, Creative Leadership Solutions, has documented how thousands of students have gotten better because they didn't have toxic grading practices. They were able to reduce the DF rate. They were able to help kids get better. They were able to reduce the DF rate. They were able to increase the number of electives because they reduced the number of failures. So we can get better. And at the time that you and I have together this afternoon, we're going to be able to help your students get better and better and better. So I'm just the eternal optimist of this. And if you can get better grading practices, you will have not only better grading, you'll have better discipline, you'll have better attendance, you'll have better academic achievement. This is now the opportunity to help everybody get better. So, Dr. Perez, I want to hand this back over to you to introduce our panel.
All right. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Anne Perez. I'm the Director of Professional Learning and an Associate for Creative Leadership Solutions. And I get to introduce you to our amazing panel today. And I'm going to go in the order that I see them on my screen. So if that is not the way you see them, I apologize. I'm going to start with Lisa Almeida. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Creative Leadership Solutions, and she's a guru in all things CLS. We have Mr. Brian Boykin, who is an associate, but comes to us from the field as a middle school principal with a background in teaching special education and school counseling. We have Terry Metzger, who is a CLS associate, but also the superintendent in Denair USD with experience in teaching just about everything at every level, I think. And then Allison Apsey and myself are both full-time associates, but Allison has a wealth of experience K through 12. She's done a lot of grading work across the United States, and a lot of her experience was working in elementary schools, and she does grading reform at that level. So that's our esteemed panel. Panel, if you could wave and say hi to everybody, that'd be awesome. And then we were kind of laughing when we started this webinar that we are coast to coast today, because actually as I sit in Terry's office, because I was working in her district today, she sits in a different part of California and then we've got Brian, who's all the way on the East Coast. So what I would love to see is just let us know where you're coming from in the chat box. Tell us what city and what state you're in, if you wouldn't mind doing that, just so we know how far our reach is today. All right, look at that. So we've got a good, got Florida, William, we've got Virginia. All right, Toledo, Ohio, that's where I'm from. Stacy Jones, wherever you are. All right, we solicited your feedback on points that you want us to discuss today. And so we've organized it into 3 big themes today. And so we'll do a little bit of theory, a little bit of practice, and then hopefully get you into some groups to chat with each other. Because what we have found is we always know that the answers are in the room, and sometimes just letting you grapple with those things together. Sometimes misery loves company, but they also find answers together. So we're going to start with the theme of fairness and accuracy because that came through in a lot of the comments. So maybe Dr. Reeves, if you'll give us like your take on the fairness and accuracy, and then let's talk about what it looks like and how we help districts, and then what it looks like from the district perspective or school.
Sure. There's two opposite extremes. One extreme is top-down policy. We'll tell you what to do. We'll publish a 20-page grading policy, and it just never works. And that's what drives teachers crazy. The other opposite extreme is chaos, bottom up, where everybody has their own policy. I published a study of more than 10,000 teachers where I gave them the very same student profile, and the same kid could have had an A, B, C, D, or F. So what I'm going to appeal to you to do is find this reasoned middle ground. It's not top down, it's not chaos, but let's see what we can do to find common ground. And as Dr. Perez suggested, let's do that by having values before policy. The values, as she said, are accuracy and fairness. So let's focus on the values first and then see what we can do to find common ground.
All right. And from the field, Terry and Brian, tell us kind of where you landed with that, either in your school or in your district.
So I am the superintendent of a fairly small district, 1,300 kiddos, preschool through grade 12. And we started this work at the secondary level. And we started the work maybe not quite at the extreme of chaos, as Doug said, but we really started the work kind of from the ground up level. And, we had a grading committee, we were talking about policy, we were doing those kinds of things and not really making much movement. But we got some teachers to buy in. Anne actually came out and did kind of a boot camp for us where we had 2 days and teachers could come in and just really learn about the work, specifically this fairness and accuracy piece, along with specific and timely or fast grading. And so we did that. But we didn't let that go on and on and on. At some point, we looked at really what were the practices that were making a difference, and then we moved forward on it. And I think that is, Anne and I were talking this morning, that really is one of the things that probably made the work go so much more quickly in our district, because as soon as we felt like we had critical mass in teacher buy-in, we moved forward and put some things into practice district-wide, and the policy followed along with that. But specific to fair and accurate, as Doug often says, nobody can argue with that. We all want grades to be fair and accurate for kids, and that continues to be our foundation for our grading practices.
For our grading journey in our school division, and specifically at my school, our start process was completely different. It kind of started from policy, and we didn't necessarily get into all the values first. So we're still pretty much on the ground level, looking at the nuts and bolts of, how to count grades, what the percentages are, how we're going to track them how we would track them in a grade book, and opportunities for retakes, reteaching, all of those things that come along. We haven't spent a lot of time in getting into the values. So as we went through the process of trying to implement a grading practice that didn't necessarily have critical mass for consensus for moving forward, we've now taken a step back, and we're kind of rebuilding from the ground up and trying to make it fit into our policy.
And then Allison, maybe you can tell us when you've worked with groups, how you address this.
Yeah, so one of the things that we focus on is action research. So working alongside groups of teachers, sometimes it's a coalition of the willing, and sometimes it's the voluntold, or it might be the entire district, where we're looking at what's getting in the way of student success with grading and doing some learning together. and identifying what those challenges are and then trying something and then reporting back, how'd that work? How'd it go? I'm working with a district right now that's going to end with guiding practices for grading for the district. So that's not policy change, that's guiding practices from educators in their district who have kind of walked this path ahead of them, know what works with their population, with their systems, and can give some guidance on some things to try and some things to change. And that can then translate, of course, into some systematic or policy reform. But it was interesting because in the Marshall memo today, there was some research out of the University of Delaware on how to best support district leaders with implementing policy change. And so there were 6 strategies. And the first one that they mentioned was balancing specificity. I have a hard time saying that word. You know what I'm saying? Like how I used to have trouble saying spaghetti when I was younger, but specificity with flexibility and designing of what is going to be loose with our policy and what's going to be really tight. And of course, that has to be aligned with the values of the district. So, but starting with practicing and having some educators walk that path ahead of others and identifying effective practices has been really powerful.
And if you don't mind, Ann, I'd just like to jump in and say, part of what you heard just now is don't wait for buy-in. Buy-in never happens. If you say we can't do anything until we have buy-in, you'll be having these arguments 50 years from now. What we have to do, as Allison just said, is to say what works with our culture, our bargaining agreement, our agenda, our budget, and let teachers take the lead by saying, I tried this, and this is what worked, and this is what didn't work. What we do is what she said is just the Action Research Task Force, one of the most powerful things that you can do. So I'll be quiet now, but I just really wanted to offer some positive reinforcement to that, because it is the single best motivator of change. It's not workshops, it's not summer school, it's not after school. Action research is the bomb. That's what really helps people make change. And in our coaching of collaborative teacher teams is what makes change happen.
And I will say one of the things that we've done in Terry's district, Allison had talked about tight and loose. And, Terry as a district leader had made some very succinct decisions. And so, they went to the 4-3-2-1 grading, but what they wanted to do was to really understand 4-3-2-1 at a very deep level. And this is that fairness and accuracy piece, because that required us going back to the standards, breaking those down, look at the learning targets, looking at success criteria, so that there was no question for students of what it was that they were expected to do. It took a lot of subjectivity out of the work. And, you ask her teachers now, what does proficient mean? And they can tell you what it means. And it wouldn't matter if it was a grade in the grade book, or if it's an A, B, C, or D, or if it's a 4-3-2-1, they can tell you. And also the students can tell you. And that has made such a big difference in their grading. And it's fair and accurate because it's not questioned. They're getting a lot less parent questions about the grade. And they get a lot less of, how do I improve my grades? Can I get extra credit? Because Terry called it, you're sharing the predetermined criteria with the students. And when they know the rules of the game, they know what they're playing. And that is fair and that is accurate, is driven from the standards. And so when it's very clear, that specificity word, when we get as clear as we can absolutely be with the criteria, the grading comes right back, because then it really becomes about feedback as a subset, of grading is just a subset of the feedback, right, Doug?
Absolutely. And can I just add as a footnote, and I know we need to get to breakouts quickly, but I'll just say the following. We're coming up in the spring. This is the time when we lose teachers from our profession. One of the most important things that we can do is to maintain respect for teachers. And one of the ways that teachers get respect is that when they're up on Sunday night grading papers, that they feel that that their feedback rather is being respected. So grading is not just about evaluation. Grading is about feedback, and feedback deserves respect. So everybody on this a webinar right now needs to understand that we're not just talking about what we do to students, but what we do for teachers, to have them feel respected because their hard work deserves respect. So that's the number one thing that I hope you'll take away from today's discussion.
All right. And before we do throw everyone into grade books, Terry, we did get a question about the grade books. Yes, they are using a grade book. They use Power School. I don't know, Terry, if you want to give that or you changed that. If you want
So we do use 4321. We do use it with a grade book. We used it with Power School. This year we switched to Aries. It is challenging from the teacher perspective in that if you are resistant to the pure 4321, you want to equate everything to the percentages that are tied in the back end on the grade book. Happy to talk to anybody more about that, but it really took a full year of mindset changing to get us going. But teachers are using it with an electronic grade book.
All right,
That is great.
so-
May I please ask what state you're in?
California.
California.
So a lot of California's districts use Aries, and whether it's Aries, Power School, or anything else, what I can tell you in the California context particularly, the state law says teachers have the ability to do the final grade. And so you can use Aries to provide evidence of a student performance, but you do not have to use Aries to calculate the final grade. That's the authority of the teacher. And another big idea, in addition to accuracy and fairness, as Ann said, is trust teachers. Don't trust Aries. The analogy that I always use is, if you remember Dwight from The Office, whose haircut looks eerily similar to my own, Dwight is a jerk. Dwight is not an educator. Dwight doesn't know anything about grading. But if you imagine that Dwight is the calculator of your Aries or Power School or any other electronic grading system, don't trust Dwight. Trust teachers. Give them the authority that they deserve to make the final decision about the degree to which students are achieving or not achieving state standards. So I really appreciate your insight on that, because I share your frustration with electronic grading systems. But the electronic grading system is never the final authority. You are the final authority, and we have to trust you and not trust Dwight.
Well, and I would love to hear, Brian, I know that you're in a different student information system in a different state, what kind of how you're combating or what you're thinking as you said you're on your journey. Like where's your mind in or what are you doing in the electronic grade book? You're muted, Brian.
In the electronic grade book, we're not in a 1 to 4 system, so we still have like the traditional grade calculation of 90 to 100, 80 to 89, A, B, C, D grade calculation. So what our teachers are trying to focus on now and trying to make the shift to is looking more specifically at student work from a standpoint of, how are they demonstrating learning and getting a focus back on students learning for the sake of learning and not working for grades.
Right. All right. So now we're really going to go to breakout rooms
And can I interject for just a minute? We have a lot of participants on this webinar, and I'm just not sure that everyone is firm in the knowledge of why to make that shift to a 4-point scale over the 100-point scale and what the benefits are. I don't know. When we talk 4, 3, 2, 1, is everybody with us? I'm wondering.
Well, let me offer a couple of ideas for you to consider. Number one, let's focus on, as Ann said earlier, on the majors. The majors are accuracy and fairness. So don't argue about A, B, C, D, F or 190, 80, 70. And I'm just pointing the finger at myself here. This is all my fault. I wrote an article, the case against the zero 20 years ago, and I still get hate mail about this. So don't argue about the minor things. Focus on the major things. The major things are accuracy and fairness. So although I do believe, as you said, Allison, that 4321 is more accurate, don't have parents show up to your board meeting with pitchforks about the minor things. Focus on the major things. Can we be accurate? Can we be fair? And the only other thing that I would say is if you're stuck with 100 points, fine. But the bottom line is not whether we do 100 or 4 points. The bottom line is, are we fair? Are we accurate? And that means you trust teachers to say at the end of the year, are we assigning grades based upon how students are performing at the time the grade is awarded? And then I'll get off my soapbox in one more second. We're broadcasting in the spring of 2024. And I want you all to imagine that your high school choir is doing this knockout performance in May of the end of the year, and all the people are ready to stand up and cheer for them. But somebody says, wait a minute, you can't cheer for those choir students because they made a lot of mistakes in September. Now that is crazy talk. And yet everybody who uses the average is going to hold people responsible for the mistakes they made months ago for what they did in May. Same thing in every other subject. So it's not the mechanics that matter. It is the philosophy that, as Allison said, that we believe in accuracy and fairness. That's what matters.
Okay, so we're gonna go into breakout rooms now. No more talking. Just kidding. And we're going into 7 breakout rooms, so 5 to 7 of you in each room, and just talk about what does fairness and accuracy mean to you in your practice in your building, or maybe something that you picked up from the panel. And we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Sarah, where are you in Williamsburg? You look familiar.
I'm the coordinator of secondary English, so I work with Tony Flock. I'm in central office. Yeah.
That's my work husband.
Yes.
We've been married for 21 years in counting. I knew you.
I'll see him next week.
Yeah. He's in California this week.
Mhm. Yeah, I think he's coming next week.
I was there last week. We were doing science,
Yeah,
math,
that's right.
social
Yeah.
studies. It was great. Loved it. You all are the trailblazers over there.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's good to see faces coming back alive here. I'm gonna like pre-apologize on recording that I somehow accidentally
Here he is.
Brian out of this call, so he's rejoining us. So we'll see how Brian gets back in here. Let's hear a couple of shares. What did you discuss? What makes fairness and accuracy? If you just want to add it in the chat, that would be great too.
I thought the consistent thing that I keep hearing just so far is having clear criteria for everyone.
Yes.
Awesome.
My concern with that is that you can have the criteria, but do you have teachers evaluating similarly? And what methodology do you use in order to know that what I do in my classroom is similar to what you're doing in your classroom, and that the kids are actually being evaluated on that criteria, not my criteria, because I closed the door and I'm the king of my class.
Right. So Ron, I'm going to jump in now because I love that you brought that up. And we always encourage the teachers to engage in collaborative scoring using those rubrics. And the rule of thumb is that if 4 of 5 people agree, then it's a pretty good rubric. So you kind of want to go for that. I hate to say an 80% because I know Doug doesn't like averages, but you can get 4 of the 5 people agreeing that the product and where the student would end up in that grade with the feedback, that collaborative scoring. It's not just collaborative scoring, it's calibration. And it's
Exactly.
so
I was
highly-
in charge of evaluation of 10,000 student essays twice a year. And we taught people how to grade on a 6-point rubric. And as part of that process, we were training them not only how to use a rubric, but but also we were moderating and seeing if there was a differentiation of more than 1 point between two readers. And we would meet with readers, we would read packets or samples, and that process was a real eye opener, because you would find some readers reading high or low, but they needed a reaction from somebody else, and it became, 10,000 papers twice a year. It was an industry, but we managed to do it, and a lot of teachers got good training as a result.
Great.
I'm so happy to hear you say that. I literally sat next to a teacher on an airplane who was going through the process that you just started, and she said, "This is the best professional learning I ever had, sitting alone in a middle seat on an airplane, going through essay after essay, saying, now I know what my students should be doing." So thank you. I'm sure that was a lot of work for you, but I really respect and appreciate what you just said.
We call it, up in Ontario, we call it consensus marking. And where we get together those groups of teachers and do just that, discuss until we had a consensus on what the level was. So yeah, Ron, nice comment there.
All right. All right. So our second theme that kind of came out of the wonderings from you all when you registered was I call it behaviors in the grade. A couple of you worded it a little bit differently, but that's definitely, I think, one of the things, at least that I've seen in our work, is how do we get behaviors out of the grade? So I want to throw this to our two practitioners, to Brian and then Terry, of, how do you, what advice would you give? How do we get behavior out of the grade? Brian, if you'll hit this one first.
I think we get behavior out of grades by first making sure that what the expectations are for grades, the students completely understand those, and those expectations are directly aligned with the standards in terms of what students are expected to know, be able to do, and how they can demonstrate that, because you want to make sure that students can actually learn concepts and apply them. So some of the like turning in work or just simple participation, but not being able to necessarily demonstrate mastery is really important.
And then Terry, I know you got kind of crafty in your district, so maybe you can share how you did this in your district.
Well, if we were going to get behavior out of the grade, the question kept coming up, well, how are we going to let parents know how their kids behave, particularly at the secondary level, which is where we really started this work. And we solved it by doing a citizenship grade. And so students get 2 grades every quarter and every semester. Only the final academic grade is recorded on the transcript, but on their progress reports and their report cards, they get both an academic grade and a citizenship grade. And the citizenship grade covers everything from, homework completion, although a lot of teachers have gone away from that now that they're really working on fair and accurate grading. That's just kind of come out of the work, that homework has gone away a little bit. And then it could include participation and those types of things, but it is a separate citizenship grade.
Allison, any tricks of the trade that you've worked with people on here?
I was just trying to, I'm using an iPad. I was trying to type really quick to see, I would love to see in the chat anyone else who has used a different strategy or a different system for separating grades from behaviors. I think for us, it was really important to be clear on what the grades meant. And that was through using a rubric. Even when we're talking about writing and the writing process, thinking through what components of accuracy in spelling and grammar and punctuation are going to be incorporated into the grade, and what components really need to be content. So when we are clear on what the grade means, it's easier to separate behavior from the grade.
And I think I'll speak from my background, which is a performance-based subject. There's an aspect of you have to participate in some subjects like PE. And so then that becomes an interesting conversation. But I was working with some world language teachers at a high school and some grading, And, they said, well, we've been grading participation. And I'm like, well, participation is actually the behavior, but tell me what you're actually looking for. And they said, we're looking for them to use the target language. I said, okay, then let's create the criteria around using the target language. And that's what you're grading, or the amount of exchanges that they're doing with each other using the vocabulary that they're learning in class. And you create your criteria around that rather than around this blanket of participation. And so just changing the wording of what they were doing with that helped them to take behavior out of the grade and really focus on what it was that they were looking for.
And it's so interesting. You made me think of a comment from a brand new teacher the other day who said, why don't they teach us how to grade equitably in college? Like, they teach us about all these other things, then they're like, grading, you'll figure it out. Like, go off and do your thing. Or listen to somebody who's been in this business for 30 years and has been grading the same way for 30 years. And then to follow that up, I had like just a mic drop comment from another high school teacher who said, I just need to recognize that this is not my high school experience. It's their high school experience. And how can I match my grading practices with what our students need today? And I'm like, yep, enough said.
Allison, that is so wise. A lot of the things that we hear are saying, this worked in 1980. Why can't they be like we were? And it's not 1980 anymore. So thank you. That was really smart.
All right. And then anyone else want to share something that you're using to get grading kind of or behavior out of your grades?
And a couple of people have mentioned in the chat that Tracy, or maybe not Tracy, from Irvine shared a book in the breakout.
I'm not Tracy. My name is Alyssa McCann, and I'm the director of data. I couldn't find my link, and so I logged in. I promise I registered. So we had a committee of teachers, principals, and administrators over the span of 2 years, and really it kind of took 3 because there was COVID in there. But we developed a guidebook based on the research. It's organized into 4 principles of assessment and grading. And each principal has encouraged and discouraged practices. So I shared a share version of that, but I just realized I didn't have the link with anybody can view. So I will adjust that link. And then if you refresh, you should be able to access it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And one of the best books I've read about behavior and grading is Changeable by Dr. Stuart Ablon of Harvard Medical School. And I kid him, because he even though he's a Harvard Medical School professor, he doesn't write like one. He writes in a very accessible, wonderful way. So I really recommend the book Changeable by Stuart Ablon, A-B-L-O-N. And I'll just give you the 1-sentence summary of that. Who is the last person we ever asked to talk about behavior? And his answer is students. Everybody on this webinar right now is a college-educated professional. We're all great. And then we get angry. Why can't they be like we were? And they're not like we were. So Dr. Ablon, I think, has some really insightful ideas about how do you include students as part of the behavior and grading discussion.
Yes. All right. So we're going to forego this chat so that we can move into the last subject, and then we'll open a breakout room for that. And this is lots of statements around kind of like creating the systematic change. And one of them was specifically systematic change in a way that's palatable to stakeholders. And really so that grades reflect what students know, not the amount of extra credit that they did or things like that.
Right.
And so I want to, Brian, I'm going to start with you here, because I know you said you haven't changed your grade book yet. So I'd love for everybody to hear, like, what are you doing to focus on that learning piece as opposed to get, and again, that palatable piece is really important right now, chunks that people can handle. You're still muted, Brian. Poor Brian.
One of the things we did in taking a step back to like really looking at what do our grades mean? What do the grades mean to the teacher? What do grades mean to students? And what do they mean to the parents? Because like everyone is applying their own experience to it. So we really looked at how we're creating assessments, the number of assessments that we're giving, and also like why are we using the assessment, and making sure that the students understand what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to learn, and that the assessment measures that. As far as percentages, because I've had my share of teachers that have been just focused on the numbers and using grades as compensation. So just trying to shift that thought process, and also in the classroom using more rubrics so students can kind of like guide and monitor their own progress, and they know exactly what they have to do to earn a specific grade. But trying to bring all those things into focus, alignment, and then just shift the thought process between all the stakeholder groups involved.
Right. And I'm gonna jump on Allison's gonna be like, oh, I would have said this. But using that action research process does make it palatable, because you're asking teachers to engage in short inquiry cycles where they're trying out something in their classroom. They have success with it. It's in your context, with your people, with your students, and it can be something small, but you can affect change in that way. And I'm going to share what I felt like one of my really brilliant principals did in action research, and then I'm going to turn it over to Terry and Allison. Was they took semester 1 to do their action research. And they did it, and they created their practices. They did their science fair. And then the principal asked them in their PLCs, it was Ohio, so it was TBTs, and asked them to adopt one of the practices that they saw at the science fair and implement it the next semester, so that could inform the work that they did at the end of the year in revising their practices and policies. And so over the course of a year, the pilot group was the one who did 2 action researches, but the entire staff just did 1. It was very manageable. It was right after COVID, and they had really great success with it. So you can do these high leverage practices that work in your context and then adopt them through the school. And when people are choosing it, it's a little bit more palatable to them. So I'll throw it to Terry and to Allison now.
Yeah, I would really second that, in that our teachers had a lot of, while I am I'm fortunate in the position that I'm in, that I am ultimately the decision maker, right, as the superintendent. So I was able to say things from a system level, but that's not actually where the work happened. Right, the work happened with teachers who tried some small changes. Okay, I'm going to develop a rubric with my team on this power standard, and students will know the predetermined criteria, the success criteria ahead of time, and they're going to rate themselves before I rate them. And it was things like that that really made a difference and really moved the work forward. We've had teachers who have said, I thought this was the impact of this change that I wanted to make, I thought the impact was going to be this, and it wasn't. It was something else, but they learned from it, and then they carried that forward into their next practice. Really empowered them to make decisions about the children sitting in front of them in period 2 English or period 5 science. It was about our kids and our teachers, not some big, not because the superintendent said we had to do it.
Absolutely. Shall I just add on to what Terry shared a little bit? I just am thinking as that you're all talking about powerful communication. And we know that the lowest level of communication is just sharing our perspectives or our opinions. And more powerful communication is when we share our perspectives or opinions or decisions backed by observations. And that's what action research provides. It provides those observations that support those changes. And even more powerful is when we communicate our decisions, opinions, perspectives backed by observations and research. And I'm guessing that if Alyssa's district pulled off that guidebook for changing grading practices, there was a lot of communication that happened with stakeholders, because we know that with a lack of information, our minds go to a negative place. And if we can support our students in understanding why reform is necessary, our teachers are the ones articulating that because they're doing the work, they're trying things out, and then we're supporting parents and families with information. That's the robust kind of communication that we need. And it needs to be, here's our decision, here's the observations that led to those decisions, and here's some research that supports it.
Mhm.
And
you
if
know,
I could, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And when I think about the systematic piece to it is deciding where's the important piece for us, decide what's the most important. If it's specificity, then focusing on the criteria and the targets. If it's getting students involved in it and the clarity, working on the rubrics. And I had put in here, give your people the support that they need. But more than that, make it okay for it to be messy. And, that was, I think anytime you take on a new initiative, we want it to be amazing because in our head, it's amazing. But the truth is it's very messy. So if we go in knowing that it's messy, learning is messy, and we make that okay, people will be more apt to try out those new practices and have it be okay. All right, so I want to make sure we have time to go into those breakout rooms and just kind of process this as well. We talked about behavior in the grading, and we talked about creating processes that are palatable. So I'm going to throw you back into those breakout rooms, and feel free to discuss either of those or chat with each other. And we'll see you back here in a few minutes.
Brian, Williamsburg, Virginia.
I saw that.
Yeah. One of them is the math specialist from the elementary school that I support, Angela, and the other one is the secondary coordinator that works with Tony. And I'm arranging a science and social studies PLC meeting.
I saw that.
With our colleagues because, I'm supporting them with the process, but that's kind of a different beast. And not very many schools have engaged in science and social studies PLCs.
Yeah.
So,
Did Jody take you up on that offer?
yeah, she did. She
Okay,
did.
good.
So I have about 5 colleagues. We're going to get on like a little think tank.
Cool.
Because, it's unique and yeah. But it's needed. It brings the focus, the flashlight onto those content areas. So.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. You've made it to 4:55 or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And we just want you to know, in case you didn't know, Terry, someone had asked about videos for parents. Like, how do we put this to parents? And our colleague, Terry, has created a sensational set of videos of where she communicated this in her district. So the link is there now. You just scroll down to the bottom of the page. You'll see Terry's face there. You can't miss which one it is that's about grading. But let's hear a couple of shares that you had that everyone else should hear and then Dr. Reeves, we're going to ask you to do closing thoughts at the end. So
Hey, Anne, I just want to say something about the videos.
Yeah.
I did those videos in one take, and I did that on purpose because I wanted it to feel genuine to parents. And so I had some notes in front of me, and I just talked a little bit about something specific. Fair and accurate grading, I think, is the first one. So, but that I think is a critical piece of communicating with parents, really being genuine about it.
All right. Thank you, Terry. And I will say Terry did a really good job of explaining what won't change as well. So definitely watch those videos. All right. So takeaways from your last breakout. Anyone want to share? You can put it in the chat or you can just unmic and.
I think one thing from our group was, how do we get started? How do we begin to implement this? How do we get teachers in a group and say, hey, this is the best practice. This is what we need to do. Let's go. And I feel like I'm very much intrigued. I want to know how to get started.
Thank you, Scott.
So Scott, was that a rhetorical question?
No, I really do need to know what to do. I think
Right,
that
so
we have some really widespread grading practices on our campus, and I think for us the challenge is we're a career center. So you get your career tech teachers teaching in the career tech
Mhm.
lab, and then you have your academic teachers, and it's almost like we have two entirely different schools because an English teacher's view is very different than our carpentry teacher's view. Yet I think that there should be some common ground in the way that we are grading and evaluating student work.
Mhm. And you know, the action research can be done a couple of different ways. You can take a group of teachers, you can take volunteers, like Allison said, or people can be voluntold. Or the way Terry approached it was like, we're doing this, and I want you to help us know what 4, 3, 2, 1 means, like translate that into language like that we can know and understand. So just as you heard the breadth of ways to do it today, there are lots of options. And then, you know, reach out to us separately. We will gladly help you with creating a plan, listening to what you've got, what you want to do. There are so many of us in the organization that are passionate about helping schools with this, who've been through it, that do it.
Can I
So-
also just suggest, I'm working with one district and they're doing a book study and Doug's newest book, which is Fearless Grading. And if you've read anything by Doug, it is easy to read, an excellent resource, and it just gets you thinking. So we've had great conversations around Fearless Grading.
All right, Doug.
Scott, if you reach out to
Oh.
me, we'll have an email go out tomorrow morning with the recording or in the next 48 hours.
Thank
If
you.
you reach out to me, I can hook you up with our colleagues who have had some CTE experience with grading.
Wow,
Well,
that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
I want to go back to what Scott said a minute ago, and that is the nexus between CTE and other grading practices. Nobody comes out from a carpentry or welding class with 3 fingers saying, hey, I got 80% out of 100, so I guess that means I get a B. Nobody does that in CTE. CTE has been doing grading right for 50 years. And I'll just say a couple of other things. Number one, CTE is not about a 100-point scale. You know, you measure twice, cut once. The late Mike Enzi, who was a great friend of mine, was the leader. And here's another CTE shout out that one of the very few 100-0 votes in the United States Senate was in favor of CTE education, because everybody on both sides of the aisle agrees on CTE. So if you're wondering who gets grading right in your schools, go to your CTE colleagues, because they do it right. They have a very clear, and part of that, and let's go back to our methodology of today of, you know, values and, you know, getting it right. They believe in safety. They believe in values. So listen to your CTE colleagues. They've really got these things right, and we should listen to them. The last thing that I want to say is that I know that reasonable people differ. I respect that we have differences of opinion, probably including on this webinar. But if we could all agree on accuracy and fairness, everybody ought to agree that grades ought to be accurate. Everybody agrees that we ought to be fair. If we can just focus on values, just like we would all agree about safety, then I think we would find some common ground. The last thing that I'll say is to listen to our students as well. I grieve that we don't have student voice here. I've been in schools where at one end of the hallway, kids are disinterested and completely disengaged. And then I'll walk down the other hallway and they've got healthcare, they've got student services, they've got all manner of agricultural and you know, other kind of CTE engagement going on, and they're, you know, it's the same kids, but an hour later, they're all engaged. So let's figure out how we can find some common ground on grading. What can we learn from each other instead of fighting with each other? That would be my request for all of you to consider.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you have more inquiries, please reach out to us. We are happy to help you dive a little bit deeper into it. You have our contact number, and you'll get an email from us tomorrow, and please feel free to follow up with that as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Ann.